Not tonight. Or any night, my wife declared without warning, so I silently redirected my time, attention, and resources until she finally noticed the man I'd become. I still remember the exact moment when those words left her lips. Not tonight or any night. The finality in her voice made my body go cold. We had been married for 6 years, and although things hadn't been perfect lately, I never expected such a definitive statement about our intimate life. That evening had started like any other. I came home from work. We had dinner while discussing mundane topics, and then moved to the living room where she scrolled through her phone while I watched TV. When I leaned over to kiss her neck, something that once made her smile, she pulled away sharply. "Don't," she said, not even looking up from her screen. "I'm not in the mood." "You haven't been in the mood for weeks now," I replied, trying to keep frustration out of my voice. "Is everything okay?" That's when she put down her phone, looked me straight in the eyes, and delivered those crushing words. "Not tonight or any night. I'm done with that part of our relationship." My mind raced through possible responses, but I sat there speechless. How does one reply to the sudden end of physical intimacy in a marriage? No explanation, no room for discussion. Just a unilateral decision that affected us both. "What exactly do you mean?" I finally managed to ask, hoping I had misunderstood. "Exactly what I said. I've been thinking about this for a while," she continued, her voice unnervingly calm. "I'm comfortable with our life together, the house, our social circle, the stability, but I'm no longer interested in physical intimacy. You can accept it or not, that's your choice." As she spoke, memories flashed through my mind. The passionate early days of our relationship, the gradual cooling over the past year, the increasing frequency of excuses, the way she flinched at my touch lately. All the signs had been there, but I had ignored them, making excuses and hoping things would naturally improve. "Is there someone else?" I asked, immediately regretting the cliché question. She actually laughed at that. "No, there isn't. I'm not interested in anyone that way anymore. This isn't about you specifically. I've just moved past that phase of my life." That almost hurt more. If there had been someone else, I could have labeled her the villain in our story. But this? How do you fight against someone simply not wanting you anymore? The following days were a strange limbo. We continued living together, eating together, even watching TV together, all while this invisible wall had been erected between us. She acted as if her declaration was as ordinary as announcing a change in grocery preferences, not the fundamental reshaping of our marriage. I tried bringing up counseling. "We don't need therapy," she responded dismissively. "There's nothing wrong with me, and I'm not going to be pressured into physical intimacy I don't want." Of course, she was right about not being pressured, but the complete unwillingness to even address the sudden change left me feeling like I was living with a stranger wearing my wife's face. At night, lying on my side of our now purely functional bed, I stared at the ceiling wondering how I had missed the gradual erosion of our connection. Had I been so absorbed in work that I failed to notice her pulling away? Or had she hidden her feelings until reaching a breaking point? One thing became increasingly clear. I was now in a marriage where I was neither wanted nor needed in any meaningful way. I was simply convenient, a contributor to bills, a social partner for couple-oriented gatherings, a housemate who helped maintain our outward image of marital success. 2 weeks after her declaration, I found myself sitting in my car outside our house, unable to summon the energy to go inside. What was waiting for me there? Another evening of polite coexistence with someone who had unilaterally changed the terms of our relationship? That's when I realized I had a choice to make. I could continue living in this emotional desert, hoping for rain that would never come, or I could redirect my time, attention, and resources towards something or someone that offered the possibility of growth. As I finally walked through our front door, a plan was already forming in my mind. Not a plan for revenge or dramatic confrontation, but something more powerful, a complete redirection of my life's energy. If she had moved on from me without physically leaving, perhaps I could do the same. The next morning, I woke up with renewed determination to understand what had happened to our relationship. Perhaps there was still something to salvage. 6 years of shared history couldn't simply evaporate overnight. "Can we talk?" I asked as she prepared her breakfast, meticulously spreading avocado on her toast like any other day. "We're talking right now," she replied without looking up. "I mean, really talk. About us. About what you said." I tried to keep my voice steady. "I think we owe our relationship at least one honest conversation." She sighed, placing her knife down with deliberate slowness. "There's nothing more to discuss. I've made my feelings clear, but you haven't explained why. Was it something I did? Something I didn't do? People don't just wake up one day and decide to fundamentally change their marriage without a reason. I didn't just wake up and decide this," she said, irritation finally breaking through her calm facade. "I've been feeling this way for months. Maybe if you paid more attention you would have noticed." That stung because there was truth in it. I had been working longer hours, taking on extra projects to secure a promotion, but I'd done it for us, for our future. At least, that's what I had told myself. "Then, let's fix it together," I suggested. "Marriage counseling, date nights, whatever it takes. Just tell me what you need." She looked at me with something resembling pity. "What I need is for you to accept my decision. I'm not interested in fixing anything because I don't see it as broken. This is simply what I want now. And what about what I want?" The words came out harsher than intended, You're free to want whatever you like, she responded coolly. But I won't pretend or force myself to maintain a physical relationship I no longer desire. The conversation went nowhere, like trying to negotiate with the wall. The following week, I scheduled an appointment with a marriage counselor anyway, hoping she might change her mind if a professional was involved. I'm not going, she stated flatly when I told her. If you need therapy to process this, go alone. So I did. The therapist, a kind-eyed woman in her 50s, listened as I recounted our situation. Has your wife experienced any trauma or significant life changes recently? She asked. Nothing obvious, I replied. Her job is stable, no deaths in the family, no health issues that I know of. Sometimes these decisions stem from unprocessed experiences or psychological changes. Without her here, I can only help you navigate your response to the situation. That's when it truly hit me. I was alone in trying to repair what was left of our marriage. My wife had already moved on emotionally, staying only for the comfort and convenience of our shared life. At home, things grew increasingly surreal. We still ate dinner together, occasionally went out with friends who had no idea about our situation, and maintained all the external appearances of a functioning couple. But there was no touch, no affection, not even the casual intimacy of long-term partners who brush against each other while passing in hallways. I began to notice other things too. She never initiated conversations anymore. Her questions about my day were perfunctory, her responses to mine minimal. She had constructed a life parallel to mine under the same roof. One where I existed as background noise, a housemate rather than a husband. One evening, when a friend commented on what a perfect couple we seemed to be, I nearly burst out laughing at the absurdity. Perfect? We were ghosts passing through each other's lives, maintaining a carefully crafted illusion. That night, lying awake at 2 a.m., I confronted some painful truths. I was holding on to something that no longer existed. The woman sleeping soundly beside me wasn't the same person who had once looked at me with love and desire. Or perhaps she was, and it was simply her feelings that had changed. More importantly, I realized I was allowing her unilateral decision to determine my self-worth. Each day spent hoping for a change that wouldn't come was a day I lost respect for myself. 3 months into this new reality, I watched her preparing for a night out with her friends. She was carefully applying makeup, something she hadn't done for me in ages. You look nice, I said, testing the waters. Thanks, she replied, without even glancing in my direction. That simple exchange crystallized everything. I had become invisible to her in all the ways that mattered. As she left for her evening out, I sat alone in our living room contemplating my options. I could continue this half-life, sustaining myself on scraps of basic human interaction. I could leave, appending the comfortable structure we'd built, or I could find another way. The idea came to me slowly at first, less a plan than an instinct for survival. If she could redirect her emotional energy away from me while maintaining our external life, perhaps I could do the same. Not out of spite or revenge, but as a necessary act of self-preservation. The next morning I woke up before her and, for the first time in months, felt something resembling hope. I would redirect my time, attention, and resources, not to win her back, but to reclaim myself. My redirection began with small changes. I set my alarm for 5:30 a.m., a full hour before she would wake up. Those quiet morning hours quickly became sacred to me, a time that was completely my own. I started with 20 minutes of meditation, something I'd always dismissed as impractical in my busy schedule. To my surprise, that brief period of morning stillness helped clear my mind of the constant thoughts about my failing marriage. Next came physical exercise, nothing dramatic, just basic push-ups, sit-ups, and a short run around our neighborhood. By the time she emerged from our bedroom, I had already showered, dressed, and started my day with purpose. You're up early, she commented on the third day, finding me sipping coffee and reading at the kitchen table. Just making some changes, I replied casually, not offering further explanation. She didn't ask for one. The second week, I joined a gym near my office. Instead of rushing home after work to an increasingly uncomfortable environment, I spent an hour working out. The physical exertion became a form of therapy. Each rep seemed to push out another fragment of resentment and self-pity. I also reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during my marriage. Nothing dramatic, just casual lunches and after-work drinks. I was careful not to mention my marital situation. These meetings weren't about seeking sympathy or bad-mouthing my wife. They were about rebuilding connections that had nothing to do with my identity as a husband. At home, I maintained civility while gradually detaching emotionally. When she spoke, I listened politely, without hanging on her every word. When she was busy with her own activities, I no longer orbited around her, seeking scraps of attention. Instead, I immersed myself in books I'd always wanted to read, and online courses I'd previously put off. 1 month into my redirection, I noticed the first physical changes in the mirror. The daily workouts had started to reshape my body. My posture had improved, and the constant tension that had knotted my shoulders for months had eased. But the most significant change was in my eyes. They looked focused, alive in a way they hadn't been since her declaration. I updated my wardrobe next. Nothing flashy or desperate, just well-fitted clothes that suited my improving physique and projected confidence. When I wore a new shirt to dinner with friends, several people commented on how good I looked. My wife noticed too, though she said nothing directly. I caught her watching me with a slight frown as I dressed for work one morning, as if trying to reconcile the man before her with the one she had dismissed. The redirection extended to my finances as well. We had always maintained separate accounts alongside our joint one for household expenses. I continued contributing my share to our joint obligations, but redirected my discretionary spending. The expensive watch I've been saving to buy her for our upcoming anniversary. I invested that money instead in a photography workshop, a passion I had abandoned years ago. Photography got me outdoors on weekends, hiking to capture landscapes at dawn when the light was perfect. These solo excursions became another form of meditation. Behind the camera, framing each shot, I found a state of flow that allowed me to forget everything else. I started posting my work online, connecting with other photographers, and building a small following that appreciated my eye for composition. "Where have you been going so early on Saturdays?" she asked, after several weeks of my new routine. "Taking photographs," I answered simply. "Since when are you into photography?" "I've always been into it, I just haven't had the time to pursue it until now." Her expression suggested she wanted to ask more, but couldn't quite figure out how. Or perhaps didn't want to show too much interest in my life after having so deliberately stepped back from it. At work, my renewed focus paid dividends. I approached projects with clarity and confidence that hadn't been present during the months of marital distress. My boss noticed the change. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up," he said after I successfully presented a new client strategy. "You're on fire lately." The compliment meant more than it should have. After months of feeling unwanted at home, professional recognition filled some of the void, not completely, but enough to keep moving forward. As the third month of my redirection approached, I realized I was sleeping better, looking better, and performing better in nearly every aspect of my life. Except my marriage, which remained a shell of formal interactions and parallel existences. The irony wasn't lost on me. In withdrawing her affection, my wife had inadvertently pushed me toward becoming a stronger version of myself. One evening as I prepared to leave for a photography meetup, she asked an unexpected question. "Are you seeing someone else?" I paused by the door, camera bag over my shoulder. "No," I answered truthfully. "Why would you ask that?" "You've changed," she said, her voice carrying a note I couldn't quite identify. "You're hardly ever home anymore." The hypocrisy of her concern almost made me laugh. "I'm just redirecting my time and energy into things that fulfill me," I replied, using her own clinical approach. "Isn't that what you've been doing?" She had no response to that, and I left without waiting for one. As I drove to meet my new photography friends, I realized something fundamental had shifted. For the first time since her declaration, I wasn't desperately hoping for her to change her mind. I was too busy creating a life that no longer centered around her approval or affection. For months into my redirection, the changes were no longer just visible to me. They were apparent to everyone. My boss called me into his office on a Wednesday morning with news that would have once been the highlight of my year. "We're promoting you to senior manager," he announced. "Your performance these past few months has been exemplary. Whatever you're doing in your personal life, it's working professionally." I thanked him sincerely, knowing that my recent success stemmed from channeling all my energy into work rather than wasting it on a hopeless situation at home. The substantial raise that came with the promotion presented new possibilities I hadn't considered before. That evening, when I shared the news with my wife over dinner, her reaction was puzzling. "That's great," she said, then hesitated. "So will that mean even longer hours?" "Possibly," I replied, studying her face. "Does it matter?" She pushed food around her plate. "Of course it matters. We hardly see each other as it is." The irony was striking. "I didn't think that bothered you, considering our arrangement." "Our arrangement doesn't mean I want to live with a complete stranger," she countered. I carefully set down my fork. "Interesting. I've been living with a stranger ever since you decided to unilaterally change our marriage. Now that I'm adapting to it, that's suddenly a problem." She had no response, and we finished dinner in silence. Later, I transferred half of my promotion bonus to our joint account for household expenses, and invested the rest in a portfolio my new financial advisor had recommended. My money was now working for my future, a future I was increasingly imagining without her. My physical transformation continued as well. The gym manager approached me after a particularly intense workout session. "Have you ever considered competing?" he asked. I laughed, assuming he was joking, but he was serious. "There's an amateur fitness competition coming up. Nothing major, but guys who've been training half the time you have are signing up. You've got the discipline and the physique for it." 6 months ago, I would have dismissed the idea immediately. Now I found myself asking for details and signing up that same day. The competition gave my workouts new purpose, specific goals beyond just escaping my home situation. My training partner, a divorced guy named Alex, became something of a confidant. After weeks of working out together, I finally shared a sanitized version of my situation. "So she just opted out of that part of your marriage?" he asked, incredulous. "Pretty much." "And you're still there because?" It was a fair question, one I'd been avoiding. "Inertia, I guess, and hope that things might change, though that's fading fast." Alex shook his head. "Man, life's too short. My ex and I fought like hell, but at least we both cared enough to fight. What you're describing isn't a marriage. It's a roommate situation with extra steps." His bluntness was refreshing. Most people offered platitudes about working through rough patches, not understanding that my marriage hadn't hit a rough patch. It had fundamentally transformed into something else entirely. My photography hobby evolved into something more substantial, A local gallery owner saw my work online and invited me to contribute to a group exhibition. Seeing my photographs professionally printed and displayed was surreal, a tangible reminder of how much had changed in just a few months. I invited several friends to the opening night, deliberately not mentioning it to my wife. So I was surprised when she showed up looking somewhat out of place among the artsy crowd. "These are really good," she said, standing before one of my sunrise landscapes. "I had no idea you were so talented." "There's a lot about me you don't know anymore," I replied, not unkindly, or maybe never knew. A woman from the gallery approached us. "Your husband has an exceptional eye," she told my wife. "We've already sold 3 of his pieces tonight." My wife's eyes widened slightly. "That's wonderful," she managed, though her expression suggested confusion more than pride. Later, as we drove home in separate cars, I come directly from work. I reflected on her appearance at the gallery. Was it genuine interest in my new passion, or merely surprise that I had developed a life that didn't revolve around her? At home, our interactions had evolved into something resembling cordial detachment. We functioned efficiently as housemates, dividing chores, coordinating schedules when necessary, maintaining the property we shared. But the emotional connection that makes a marriage was gone, and I was no longer mourning its absence as acutely. The fitness competition arrived, and to my surprise, I placed 3rd in my category. Standing on that small platform with a medal felt strangely validating. Not because I needed external approval, but because it marked how far I'd come from the devastated man who had sat speechless in our living room months ago. Several women approached me after the event, some obviously flirtatious. I was polite but distant, not ready to complicate my life further. Still, their attention reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. I was desirable, worthy of affection, capable of attracting genuine interest. That night, as I placed my medal in a drawer, my wife passed by our bedroom door. "Congratulations," she said, lingering in the doorway. "I saw the pictures your friend posted online." "Thanks," I replied, closing the drawer. She hesitated, then asked, "Are you happy with all these changes?" I considered the question carefully. I'm happier than I was when trying to understand why my wife suddenly decided I wasn't worth touching anymore. So yes, relatively speaking, I'm happy. She flinched slightly at my frankness. "That's not fair." "None of this has been fair," I countered. "But we work with what we've got. You redirected away from me. I'm redirecting toward a better version of myself." As she walked away without further comment, I realized we were approaching a crossroads. My redirection had become more than a coping mechanism. It was a new path altogether, one that might ultimately lead away from her completely. The pivotal moment came during a company retreat 6 months into my redirection. My team had gathered at a lakeside resort for a weekend of strategic planning and team building. After a productive day of meetings, we relaxed around a fire pit, sharing stories and drinks under the stars. My colleague Sarah, who had joined the marketing department 3 months earlier, sat down beside me. "You know, when I first started, everyone told me how lucky I was to be working with you," she said, her voice quiet enough that only I could hear. "Really? Why is that?" I asked, genuinely curious. "They said you'd completely transformed the department's performance, but they also mentioned how much you changed personally over the past few months." She hesitated, then added, "They said you used to be withdrawn, almost sad. That doesn't match the person I've known." I stared into the flames, considering how to respond. Let's just say I went through some personal challenges and decided to focus on what I could control rather than what I couldn't. She nodded thoughtfully. "Well, whatever you did worked. You seem completely in your element now." As our conversation continued into the evening, I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't with anyone in a long time. Sarah was intelligent and insightful with a sharp sense of humor that repeatedly caught me off guard. We discovered shared interests in photography and hiking, and she seemed genuinely impressed when I showed her some of my recent work on my phone. "You have a real talent," she said, leaning closer to swipe through the gallery. "These should be published." The warmth of her shoulder against mine sent an unexpected jolt through my system, a stark reminder of how long it had been since I'd experienced even casual physical contact. I carefully shifted away, uncomfortable with my reaction. Later, as the group dispersed to their cabins, Sarah walked alongside me on the path. "Some of us are planning a sunrise hike tomorrow before the meeting starts," she mentioned. "You should join. Perfect lighting for those landscape shots you love." I agreed, and the next morning found myself standing atop a ridge with Sarah and 2 other colleagues as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. I took dozens of photographs, but found my lens repeatedly drawn to Sarah's profile against the dramatic backdrop. When I returned home Sunday evening, my wife was in the kitchen preparing dinner, something she hadn't done for us in months. "How was the retreat?" she asked, her tone unusually attentive. "Productive," I replied, setting down my back. "We finalized the strategic plan for next quarter." She nodded, then asked, "I saw some of the photos you posted. Beautiful location." It was, I agreed, wondering at her sudden interest. "That woman in some of the pictures, is she on your team?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't realized Sarah had featured prominently in my uploads. "That's Sarah, our new marketing specialist," I answered neutrally. "She's very pretty," my wife observed, her eyes studying my face. I hadn't really noticed. I lied, feeling oddly defensive. "Really?" Her disbelief was evident. "You've taken about a dozen photos with her in them." I chose my next words carefully. She happened to be in the frame during our group activities. Why are you asking about this? She turned back to the stove. Just curious about your colleagues, that's all. But there was something in her tone that suggested more, perhaps concern or even jealousy. Emotions that seemed inconsistent with someone who had deliberately created emotional distance between us. The following weeks brought subtle changes to our home dynamic. My wife began asking more questions about my day, preparing meals occasionally, even suggesting we watch a movie together one Friday night. The attention might have thrilled me months ago, but now it only confused me. Meanwhile, at work, my collaboration with Sarah intensified as we led a major campaign together. Her creativity complemented my strategic approach perfectly, and our project quickly gained traction with clients. We often worked late, our professional rapport evolving into friendship as we shared takeout dinners and personal stories during breaks. I was careful to maintain appropriate boundaries, but I couldn't deny enjoying her company. The ease of our interactions, the genuine interest she showed in my thoughts and ideas, the simple pleasure of being seen and heard by someone who valued my presence. One evening, as we wrapped up work well after everyone else had left, Sarah looked at me intently. "Can I ask you something personal?" she requested. I nodded, though apprehension flickered through me. "Are you happy? In your life outside work, I mean." The directness of her question startled me. "That's complicated," I answered honestly. "I've noticed you never mentioned your home life," she continued. "You talk about your photography, your fitness training, your financial investments, but never your personal relationships." I hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. "My marriage has been challenging recently. We're essentially living separate lives under the same roof." Sarah's expression showed genuine concern without pity, a distinction I appreciated. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "You deserve better." Those 4 words hit me with unexpected force. You deserve better, not marriages are hard. Or have you tried counseling? Just a simple acknowledgement that the situation I described was inadequate for someone she valued. On the drive home, her words echoed in my mind. Did I deserve better? I had spent so long trying to understand my wife's withdrawal, then adapting to it, that I had never fully questioned whether I should accept it at all. When I arrived home, my wife was waiting up, something she hadn't done in ages. "You're working late a lot," she commented as I set down my keys. "Big campaign," I explained. "It's going well." "With Sarah?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. I looked at her directly. "Yes. Sarah's the creative lead. Why do you keep asking about her?" My wife hesitated, then said what I suspect had been building for weeks. "Because she looks at you the way I used to. And you look happier in those photos with her than you have around here in months." The observation hung between us. Neither accusation nor confession, but something more complicated, recognition of a shifting reality we hadn't yet named. "We need to talk," I said, after a moment of heavy silence. "Really talk. Not the surface-level conversations we've been having for months." My wife nodded slowly, and we moved to the living room. The same space where she had declared the end of our intimate relationship. What felt like a lifetime ago. Now we sat facing each other, strangers who shared mortgage payments and grocery lists, but little else. "Are you having an affair?" she asked directly, her voice calm but strained. "No," I answered honestly. "I've never betrayed our marriage vows." "But you're thinking about it," she pressed. I considered deflecting but chose truth instead. "I'm thinking about a lot of things. About what marriage means when one person unilaterally changes the terms, about whether companionship without intimacy or emotional connection is enough for a lifetime, about whether I'm living authentically or just going through motions." She looked down at her hands. "So you're punishing me by transforming your entire life and flirting with your coworker." The accusation sparked something in me. Not anger but clarity. "This isn't about punishment, it never was. This is about survival. When you told me not tonight or any night, you didn't just reject physical intimacy. You rejected me as a partner worthy of your desire and affection." "That's not fair," she protested. "I never stopped caring about you." "Caring isn't the same as loving," I replied. "You decided to keep the comfortable parts of our marriage while discarding the rest. And for months, I tried to understand, to adapt, to find a way forward that respected your decision while preserving my sanity." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "My transformation wasn't about making you jealous or attracting others. It was about reclaiming parts of myself I neglected, parts that were withering in the shadow of your rejection." She was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't think it would affect you this much," she finally admitted. "I thought we could continue everything else as normal." The admission stunned me with its casual cruelty. "How could you possibly believe that? Marriage isn't a buffet where you select which parts you want and discard the rest." "People change," she said defensively. "Feelings change. I was honest with you instead of pretending." "Yes, you were honest, and I'm being honest now. The man who sat here devastated by your declaration months ago no longer exists. The changes I've made aren't temporary adjustments to a crisis, they're who I am now. Someone who values himself enough not to accept scraps of affection." A tear slipped down her cheek, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in ages. "So you're leaving me for her?" I shook my head. "This isn't about Sarah or anyone else. This is about us, about what's broken between us and whether it's worth fixing." "And is it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The question deserved careful consideration. Despite everything, we had built a life together, shared memories and dreams. Walking away wouldn't be simple or painless. I don't know, I answered truthfully. But I do know this. I won't return to how things were. I won't pretend that your unilateral decision didn't fundamentally alter our relationship, and I won't apologize for becoming someone stronger in response. She wiped her tears, composing herself. So what happens now? Now we make choices based on reality, not nostalgia or convenience. You chose to redirect your emotional energy away from our marriage. That was your right. I chose to redirect my time, attention, and resources toward personal growth. That was my right. I took a deep breath before continuing. And now we both need to decide whether there's anything left between us worth salvaging, or if we've become fundamentally incompatible. And, if I want to try? She asked, a note of hope in her voice that surprised me. Then it starts with understanding that we can't go backward. There's no returning to how things were before your declaration. And there's no maintaining this half-marriage we've been living. If we move forward together, it has to be towards something new that recognizes and respects who we've both become. She nodded slowly. And if I can't give you what you need, the question was honest, perhaps the most honest she'd been in months. And it deserved an equally honest answer. Then we part ways, hopefully with kindness and respect for what we once meant to each other. We talked for hours that night, peeling back layers of resentment and miscommunication. She revealed struggles with her own self-image that had contributed to her withdrawal. I admitted how deeply her rejection had wounded my sense of worth and desirability. There were no simple resolutions or dramatic reconciliations, just two people finally acknowledging the gulf between them and questioning whether it could be bridged. As dawn broke, we reached a decision that felt both painful and necessary, a trial separation. Not as a prelude to divorce, but as space to evaluate what we truly wanted individually before deciding what we could offer each other. I moved into a furnished apartment the following weekend. Setting up my new space felt strangely liberating, arranging things according to my preferences alone. Creating an environment that reflected the person I had become, rather than the relationship I had lost. 2 weeks into our separation, I received a text from my wife asking to meet for coffee. We chose a neutral location, neither our home nor my new apartment, but a quiet cafe halfway between. She looked different somehow, not dramatically changed as I had been with my physical transformation, but more present, more engaged with her surroundings. I've been thinking a lot, she began after we exchanged awkward greetings, about what you said about unilaterally changing our marriage. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. You were right, she admitted. I made a decision that affected both of us without truly considering what it would mean for you. That wasn't fair or respectful. The acknowledgement meant something, though perhaps not as much as it would have months earlier. Thank you for recognizing that, I replied simply. I also realized something else, she continued. Watching you become this new person, confident, focused, thriving, made me see how much I'd stagnated. Not just in our relationship, but in my life generally. She cupped her coffee mug with both hands. The truth is, I was jealous, not of Sarah or anyone else, but of your transformation itself. You found purpose and passion while I was just existing. Her honesty disarmed me. What does that mean for us? She met my gaze steadily. I don't know yet, but I'm starting therapy, and I'm trying to find my own redirections. Whether that leads us back together or towards separate paths, I needed you to know that you inspired that change. As we parted ways after an hour of the most genuine conversation we'd had in over a year, I realized that my redirection had come full circle. What began as a desperate attempt to survive emotional abandonment had become a journey of authentic self-discovery, one that was still unfolding, regardless of where my marriage ended up. I walked back to my car feeling neither triumphant nor defeated, but something more valuable, at peace with the person I had become through adversity. Whatever came next, I would face it not as someone seeking approval or connection from others, but as someone who had rediscovered his own worth. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.
After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind, or maybe it has brought back some old memories. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories, and they connect all of us. Everyone has their own unique journey in life, and we all try to understand the world in our own way. These kinds of moments remind us that we are all human, sometimes happy, sometimes sad, and always learning something new. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it with your friends. Your thoughts and feedback are always valuable to us, as they motivate us to create even better content. Every story has its own unique angle, and our goal is to understand everyone's perspective and make our content diverse and relatable. Stories like these help us realize that life's journey is different for everyone, and by hearing other stories, we learn something new. You can also share your own stories with us. Your experiences are valuable to us as well, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave your feedback. We aim to create content that brightens your mind and gives you new ideas every time. If you've already seen this video before, your feedback is still important. With every piece of feedback, we can improve our content and bring a new perspective to our viewers. Today, what we saw was just a small part of the many stories shared on Reddit and across the world. It's a reminder of how we all try to understand life by sharing our experiences with each other. This video was only an example of how we try to connect with others through storytelling, learning about different sides of life. We hope to continue sharing such stories that help us all learn and grow together. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon. If you haven't already, please like and follow for more amazing content. Your support keeps us going, and we will strive to bring you more thought-provoking and heartwarming stories. Until next time, take care and stay curious. ****